Hi, welcome to Thinking Green. I'm Rana, and today is Tuesday, October 27th, and this morning the Bulletin of Nuclear Scientists, Atomic Scientists, released the new doomsday clock time, and we had been at 89 seconds to midnight. Potential apocalypse due to human causes, and now it was moved to 85 seconds, no doubt because of both turmoil in the world in terms of wars and other belligerent behaviors, and also because of climate change, some of the other threats of misuse of biotech and also of AI that now are also seen as contributing factors. So with that in mind, we're really closer than ever to a lot of destruction. That said, we'll try to be a little proactive today. My guest today is Omar Antar. He's been on the show a couple times before, and he's I met him through the Connecticut Palestine Alliance. So welcome again, yes. Omar.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And I guess maybe you can start out talking a little bit about the Connecticut Palestine Alliance as well as a couple of the other roles you play.
Yes. So most people know me through the Connecticut Palestine Alliance, and we started in January 2024. And but the other, in the year of 2024, which was an election year, I was one of the main organizers or workers for Justice for Palestine in Congress, which was it was in part a formal political campaign in the 5th Congressional District, and so that's the northwest corner, the opposite side of the state of Connecticut, because of the margin of victory of Representative Jahan Hayes was small, and there was many urban pockets in the 5th Congressional District, and so we wanted to target her on the issue of Palestine in that congressional campaign. But it also became an umbrella organization of all pro-Palestine campaigns, which included formal Green Party candidates like Mary Sanders in the 1st Congressional District against Larson, and other write-in campaigns across the state. I was very happy that we actually had all 5 congressional districts in the state of Connecticut. You could vote for someone who's not for genocide in Palestine.
And even though some were write-ins, they were formal write-ins,
yes.
Which do get counted.
Yes, absolutely.
So it isn't just like writing in your neighbor.
Correct.
It's part of the official record.
And the third hat that I have that is kind of new is a 501c4 organization, meaning that they can endorse candidates and even in some ways, contribute money through PACs or things like that for issues. The 501c4 organization is actually Connecticut Muslim Civic Alliance. And so because of the word Muslim, it is more geared towards that religious population, but obviously Palestine is a huge aspect of their advocacy or issue, concerns. But it also includes other matters like economics and other things. But so 2 out of the 3 are explicitly Palestine, and the third is implicitly Palestine, but it is formally called the Connecticut Muslim Civic Alliance. But they can endorse candidates, and so when we want to talk about elections, those are the 2 hats that I have: JPC, Justice for Palestine in Congress, and the Connecticut Muslim Civic Alliance, and to respect the nonprofit organizations that work with the Connecticut Palestine Alliance. So there are churches and mosques, and I think one anti-Zionist synagogue in New Haven area, Mending Mayan, to respect their 501c3 status. We'll leave the policy discussion to Connecticut Palestine Alliance and the election stuff to the other 2.
Okay.
So I switch hats, whatever I'm talking about.
It's almost like the big leagues, because everyone, has their finger in different aspects of getting things done that have to be done.
Absolutely.
So maybe we can do a brief, recap of what's happened in Palestine, a little bit going, way back to the establishment of the state, but
okay.
Briefly, but October 7th wasn't really the start.
Yeah. And even when people start an issue of Palestine, they usually start in 1948, but that I think is kind of an error. The real start is 1947 with the Balfour Declaration and British imperialism, because Israel, or the Zionist project, is really a European imperial project, and it starts with the British, but was overtaken by the Americans, especially after '67, but of course. But also in '48. But the British were pretty, and the Europeans were very essential in, because that area is a choke point right next to the Suez Canal, especially for the British imperial project to have ships go from England to India, and so it's a very crucial jewel in the imperial project of Great Britain, and then later United States. And so in the Balfour Declaration, an anti-Semitic member, a lord of the British elite or government, Lord Balfour, basically gave land that does belong to him, but to a subgroup, as they do in many different places of the world. They pit populations against each other, often minority populations against majority populations, in which the minority is dependent upon the British Army and the British state to prevent them being overrun by the majority. And so it's a classic imperial design and nefarious design in that. But in terms of officially the state of Israel being founded, it was founded in '48 after about a year of ethnic cleansing in 1947. So when they talk about the Nakba, it starts in '47 to '48, and so it's only in May of '48 that officially the state of Israel is founded, and it was immediately recognized by the United States, and then quickly after that by the Soviet Union. So in the early days of the state of Israel, it was actually considered more on the socialist side, because a lot of the
Sure, I was there in 1969, and there was it was quite attractive to go there and be able to live in one of the pockets where socialism, pretty much thrived compared to what was happening in the U.S. Certainly.
Yes, and it's an interesting trajectory of the state of Israel's its twists and turns. So in those early years, the love between the United States and Israel wasn't that great because of that issue of socialism, and so the best example is the '56 Suez crisis, in which the United States and Eisenhower, president at that time, basically told England, France, and Israel to back down, and they did, especially after the economic threat to England by the United States. And so that 1956 Suez crisis, in which the United States stood against Israel and England, kind of marked the end of British imperial rule, because they didn't have the power financially or militarily to finish their project with Israel. But that changes in 1967, in that the United States and became very tightly connected, and even more over time, with Israel because of Israel's utility against the Soviet Union and the Soviet allies, especially within the Arab world. And so they, so even just like whenever they had wars in '67 and '73, the capture of whether tanks or helicopters were a capture of Soviet machinery and helicopters, et cetera, because those were being given and employed by the Arab states that were fighting Israel. And so, and it obviously grew and grew until its maximum height till today,
Yeah, at that point, I was there during the Yom Kippur War, and we definitely had the sense, even though there was a lot of blackout of what you really learned what was happening, that it was a proxy war. If you heard a plane overhead, was it a MiG or a Phantom? It wasn't an Israeli plane. It wasn't a Jordanian or a Syrian or an Egyptian or Lebanese plane. It was U.S. or Soviet.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, and even going back, I was asked to do a presentation to some high school students and went back, and you talked about how strategic that bit of land is. And you can go to like 3000 BC, and it's always been a spot of land that has very infrequently had self-determination because the empire of every era wanted that spot.
Absolutely. Yeah. And on the issue of the nuclear issue, actually, so in the early days, Israel often got a lot of its weapons from the East Bloc, like Czechoslovakia at that time. But then in 1963, France was actually the biggest power to start the nuclear program of Israel in 1963. But also, nuclear material was stolen from the United States, from Pennsylvania, around that area. And JFK was really upset with the nuclearization of Israel, and that's why people have suspicions about, he was not only assassinated because of his failure to support the Bay of Pigs operation by the CIA, but because of his opposition to the Israeli nuclear program. So the most significant, the kind of timeline point in the nuclear program of Israel is in 1979. There was a nuclear test in the Indian Ocean off of the apartheid state of South Africa. And it's also well known that the apartheid state of South Africa collaborated very tightly with the nuclear program of Israel, including that very important nuclear test in 1979.
I think that even when I was there in the early 1970s, it was a pretty open secret that Dimona was a center of nuclear weaponry, not just of nuclear power, nuclear energy. Yeah. So I think it has gone back pretty far, which kind of brings me to talking about we were talking a little about your going to Washington, D.C., and one of the reasons, I think, is that we're not following our own laws.
Yes, absolutely. So every month, Doctors Against Genocide has what they call a lobby day. The next one is February 11th, and you can go to doctorsagainstgenocide, all spelled out.org, and to see their work there. And so we meet with the mostly the staffers, but occasionally the representatives and the senators. So we go to Capitol Hill. I'm actually working personally on trying to get the State Department people, but that would be brand new because I connected with Josh Paul. He's the person in the State Department who resigned, and so maybe he can connect us with the current people. And so mostly the things that we do is very basic. They kind of like boil down their asks, and the recent one in January 14th, our main point was to ask for mobile homes because this is winter and 90% of the structures have been destroyed in Gaza, and they're blocking, the Israeli government is blocking mobile homes as well as tents. There's 60,000 mobile homes which are more structurally more sturdy because there's the recent storms and flooding in Gaza because this is their winter, as we know. But they blocked 100% of those. But they allowed in 10% of the tents. There's about 200,000 tents at the border being blocked, but they let in 10%. They allowed on 20,000 tents. So we really need the mobile homes, because tents are kind of useless, especially in high winds and rains and things like that. And also we have a persistent request to have the people co-sponsor or vote for particular resolutions. So the most significant of which is HR 3565, which Block the Bombs Act, as they call it. And unfortunately, none of the Connecticut representatives have co-signed or co-sponsored that legislation. And so my role is often to connect with all 7 of the 5 congresspersons and the 2 senators to see if we could meet with hopefully the senators and representatives eventually themselves, but most often their relevant staffers. So we met with Blumenthal staffers, which, as you can imagine, was not very fruitful, to be diplomatic about it. So our main goal is to ask for, and it seems that the most impressive person is Senator Van Hollen from Maryland. And so he personally put together a video asking for the release of a particular U.S. Florida citizen. His name was Mohammed Ibrahim, who was imprisoned in the torture dungeons of Israeli military prisons in the West Bank. And he put out a video talking about him personally and directly. And because of that political pressure, he was released. So we do find success but on a very limited, almost individual basis. And so there is utility to these visits and pressure campaigns and actions by the particular senators and congresspersons, but it is, it's not very satisfying in that we can't end the war, and these senators don't seem to be able to end the war, especially since they're not in a majority. But there is utility in providing individual relief and maybe some relief on some very practical things like the mobile homes. Maybe they can't get all 60,000 in, but if there's enough pressure with video appeals with video showing all the storms and the flooding and the tents being ripped apart or in the wind, if they mesh those video appeals, there might be political pressure to allow in some of these mobile homes.
Now we're starting an election year for Congress. I don't think senators are up, either of our senators are up for re-election this year, but of the Connecticut delegation of 7, are there any of them that you're making headway with?
Headway? Ironically, the person who, maybe the best. I really shouldn't say. Just as a starter, I think there is a very nice app and website called TrackAPAC.org, I believe, and our Instagram page on the Connecticut Palestine, we've actually listed all 7 of their donations by the Israel lobby, because we don't say donation by APAC, because that's only recently were they able to donate to campaigns. So the congressmen and women would say, "Oh, I don't take any money from AIPAC," and technically they were true, but it was misleading in that it was the 501c4s and other PACs and other vehicles that were funding their campaign that was obviously pro-Israel. So to be accurate, that Track APAC website shows all Israel lobby funding, and of the 7, the one with the most is Senator Blumenthal, and the one with the least is Larson. Actually, he has about $30,000 of the different lobbies, and so it's actually listed on their website. When you can just search for Connecticut and you get all 7, and they list the different types. Like DMFI is one. There may be J Street. So there's a whole bunch that they list, which represents the Israel lobby, of which AIPAC is only one part, and maybe actually an ignorable part, at least in the past. So Blumenthal has the most. Larson has the least. I think in terms of the representative, I think DeLauro has the most, over 100,000, or even maybe close to 150,000. But headway, so some people like DeLauro and I think Courtney and Hayes, they do a few minor things like I'll put together a website that shows different resolutions, but there are some weaker resolutions that just say, like, we encourage humanitarian aid to come in, and but our most prominent ask is the Block the Bombs Act, and there's others, that are more political but have a profound effect. Like there's a resolution by Rashida Tlaib that asks for defining the Israel's actions as a genocide, because that has legal consequences, if that ever passes. But of course, I don't think any of the five have signed on to that. So the best you can say is that they're okay with some humanitarian aid, but which raises the question, is that humanitarian aid just a band-aid when the real issue is to stop the actual war and genocide? And so that's why we're asking for the Block the Bombs Act, co-sponsorship, and the humanitarian aid is absolutely essential, and I mean we're pushing them to give the mobile aid. And also, it should be noted that it's only about 25% of the daily required trucks are allowed in. So, and there is no real ceasefire because Israel violates it constantly. And they occupy over 0.5%, maybe 53% of the Gaza currently. And so we're kind of stuck between phase 1 and phase 2 of the so-called ceasefire, and which is really not a ceasefire because the Israelis bomb and kill. So it affected people here in Connecticut. So there is a leader or president of the Farmington Valley American Muslim Center. His name is Khamis, and he's from Gaza, and he came over many years. But he has a big family, and like over 200 members of his family have been killed. But his personal brother died after the ceasefire, and it even became news in Al Jazeera Arabic. And so I've been trying to get clips of that news. But to say that the ceasefire has stopped the killing is just flatly untrue, and we have direct proof here in Connecticut. And
I do want to point out, and you've kind of mentioned it, that, and I think the Block the Bombs Act is related to it. If Israel is a nuclear power, which we're quite sure it is, the U.S. isn't really permitted by our own laws to sell weaponry to them, correct?
Yes. So, yes.
And if they're violating human rights,
exactly,
we're also not allowed to sell weaponry to them.
So that last point was the Leahy laws, as they call them. So I think because when he was a younger man, Leahy, was able to pass legislation that says if a country violates human rights on a substantial scale, no U.S. aid can go to that. But of course, the U.S. State Department constantly waives Israel all the time. But there's also another law that says if U.S. aid is blocked by a country, like U.S. aid going to Gaza is blocked by Israel, then the state doing the blocking cannot receive military aid. And of course, they violated that. And of course the nuclear prohibition. So if a country is in violation of the NPT or Non-Proliferation Treaty, also that country that violates that treaty cannot receive military aid. So on many laws and many grounds, if the United States government was honest, it would block especially military aid to the state of Israel, but does not. And so there's a very glaring hypocrisy and double standard in which there's always an excuse and waiver for the state of Israel. And it becomes a very important point because obviously there's a serious threat of imminent war or attack on Iran in these weeks and days because I think 2 aircraft carriers came from the South China Sea to the Persian Gulf to be positioned to support or initiate an attack on Iran. And also on Thursday, January 15th, there was a 4.2 Richter scale earthquake that centered around Dimona, which is the known, as you mentioned, nuclear weapons production site in Israel. And so people are suspicious that measured earthquake was a nuclear weapons test. And so it was because of the imminence of and the threats against an attack on Iran, that possible nuclear weapons test was also an additional threat against Iran. And so that's why I personally want to engage with the wonderful anti-nuclear movement here, especially here in the London area. The Connecticut Committee for the Prevention of Nuclear Weapons had a rally outside of the Electric Boat.
Yeah, every year for the last 5 years.
Yes.
Since that treaty entered into force, when I don't remember how many countries had to sign it before it could enter into force.
Yeah.
But most of the small countries of the world have. The big countries, none of the ones that currently have nuclear weapons or who hope to have nuclear weapons are signing it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just against owning them, but it's against enabling them, transporting them.
Or hosting them on your soil, that kind of thing?
Yeah, there's a list of about 8 or 9 things that you're not allowed to do to facilitate nuclear weaponry.
Yeah.
So, now about maybe a year ago, we were seeing a little bit on the news of Israel and Iran kind of going back and forth, and Iran's responses were pretty restrained and smart at the time, but things have escalated recently. What's caused the escalation?
A visit by Netanyahu to Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and that was in the last days of December 27, 29, something like that, of last year. And so obviously in the most important context is that in June of 25, there was they call it the 12-day war, in which we were introduced to the missile barrages of Iran against Israel, and especially so Israel was able to initiate a surprise attack against Iran, and was successful in the initial hours, and they killed. They destroyed parts of their defensive systems and individuals in the nuclear program, like apartment buildings and that kind of thing. So, which is really nefarious, because it wasn't like an individual; it was like whoever else was in the apartment building. So, it killed many civilians as collateral damage. But within hours, Iran was able to reconstitute its defenses, and over the next 12 days, there was. Barrages of missiles, both hypersonic and as well as more traditional missiles from Iran to Israel. But what was new and surprising was that the air defense system, even the most sophisticated ones from the United States, like THAAD and of course Iron Dome I think they call it Sling and things like those kind of names. But all the air defenses of Israel and basically the United States were ineffective against the hypersonic missiles of Iran. And of course, there is a tightening relationship between Iran and Russia and China. And so we do know, of course, the hypersonic missiles of Russia have been used in Ukraine. And so they've demonstrated their effectiveness and the inability of any U.S., because there are U.S. Air defenses in Ukraine, but those defenses also failed in the case of the Russian hypersonic missiles. And it seems that Iran also has, they demonstrated they have those hypersonic missiles in June and during the 12-day war. And so it shows that, the reason that we probably might not have the war against Iran like today or in the last few weeks is because of the recognition of the hypersonic missile capability of Iran to defeat the missile defense systems of the United States / Israel. And so, yes, but of course, we're not inside the military planners of Israel or the United States to know what things they can move around or adjust to go ahead with the attack anyways. And, because maybe they can recognize their limitations but still bury it under extra layers of bunkers and go ahead anyway. So who knows? Well,
it seems like so recently in here in the U.S. we've seen a lot of really aggressive action by the current administration. Minneapolis has been the epicenter for the last couple weeks, month, and but it seems like since it didn't really begin this way. It's been going on forever, but that campus protests and then city square protests are being clamped down upon. And I just wonder if the Palestine movement was limited. A lot of Americans didn't really see it as very relevant to their lives. But now, with ICE and what they're doing in American cities and going after, among other things, medical personnel, which is, to me, scarily like what has happened in Palestine. Do you see any way to get more people in the U.S. to, take a broader view in light of the, interaction between Israel and ICE, for example?
I'm very thankful for this question because there is a person who comes to us with the Doctors Against Genocide lobby days. His name is Anthony Angular, and he was a contractor with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, and he was a whistleblower about how they were basically killing anybody lining up for aid. So he is the one, and he's running for Congress, and he's the one in a recent interview on Breaking Points, he mentioned that there is a program called the BIRD program, or the Binational International Research and Development, or something like program, which is a formal program between DHS and the State of Israel. And so there is direct support and training through this BIRD program that is, formally established, and there's even congressional reports that we posted on the Instagram page that shows that there's a very intense, and this has started back in the first Trump administration. So this report is from 2019, and so the issue of ICE is it's right now this Trump 2 is really scaling up, and because the budget is like more than the FBI and all the police services of the United States combined for ICE, and so this is really a personal Gestapo of Stephen Miller, who's our co-president, and Stephen Miller is well known to be a Zionist and very pro-Israel as well, of course, and so the connection between ICE and the State of Israel is very intimate and very strong, and it's explicit and funded very well, especially through this BIRD program. But also, you can just watch their tactics. They're mirrored between the tactics of ICE in Minneapolis and what you can see in the West Bank and Gaza many years ago. But yeah.
This is a little off that subject, but I've been thinking about some of the religious aspects. You said one of the organizations, a 501c4, is centered upon Muslim well-being. But I've noticed that in Palestine, recently, Israel has been persecuting Christian Palestinians more and more. And I keep wondering if that's going to cause some sort of schism.
I think it already has. As good lefties, we don't really like to give the praises for Tucker Carlson or Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is the only person, at least that I know of, and no Democrat has done this, who on the House floor, she explicitly and several times declared Israel to be a nuclear power. And so we have to pressure our Democratic representatives to do the same. And that's actually one of the things that I want to work with the anti-nuclear movement here in New London to kind of formally put together petitions to formally ask, especially the Democrats and the progressive Democrats, to make a legislation and co-sponsor legislation that formally declares Israel a nuclear power, to follow in formal resolutions Marjorie Taylor Greene. But Marjorie Taylor Greene and Tucker Carlson invited Mother Agapia. She's a Greek or Russian Orthodox nun, but her last name is Stephanopoulos. She is the sister of the famous Stephanopoulos, who was in the Clinton administration, and then ABC News, George Stephanopoulos. And she gave a whole huge, 3-hour lecture on Tucker Carlson podcast. And there is a growing anti-Israel movement on the right. That it does definitely focus on on the Palestinian Christians. And the Palestinian Christian community is an ancient one. Basically, that's where it started, right?
Right, and some of those people have been there all this time.
Yes, exactly. And but it is true that Israel and also Israel as a state, but also non-state actors within Israel have a particular venom towards Palestinian Christians, and I believe it's because they actually want the Palestinian Christians to leave and to be erased from the Palestine question, because it's easier, because especially since 9/11 it's been easy to demonize all Muslims. But if you complicate the issue of Palestine and say, no, there's a very significant and powerful and important segment of Palestinians who are Palestinian Christians, and there's a lot of support for Palestinian Christians even within the Muslim community, going back decades. For 800 years, Bethlehem has been a Palestinian Christian town. It's only recently, in the last since the occupation, that the Palestinian Christian population of Bethlehem has gone down because of this pressure on that population. So there's a lot of respect for the Palestinian Christians, within the entire Palestinian, society, which of course is majority Muslim currently. So I was saying that both the venom from like settlers who do harassment, like the mother Agapia, she said that she personally has been spit upon, and like in the city of Jerusalem, I believe, and so. So it comes from private individuals, but also from the state, and their pressure to and it applies also to non-Christians as well, to have them basically leave. But I guess there is a diaspora of especially Palestinian Christians, and that I guess it makes it easier for Palestinian Christians to leave, to go with their family who are in safer places abroad.
Yeah, well, I know, and you were there too when Dr. Kumsia was speaking in Connecticut, and his project is the museum for biodiversity and sustainability, but that he felt that relatively protected for a Palestinian in Bethlehem because it's like the Vatican owns that property.
Yes. And
so I do think that this, persecution of Christian Palestinians isn't a very smart move.
Yes. And even like one of the oldest churches in the area is a church in Gaza, and there's even a Catholic church that was attacked during the genocide, and but because of that attack, the Pope Francis would call every night as it's a symbolic way to say, to basically warn the Israelis, we have a connection, and politically we will protect this church, and so it's very very. But I think they feel that they can act with impunity because there's been no hardline withdrawal of weapons and diplomatic support, and so until that happens, and that's why we push for Block the Bombs Act and to the JRDs, the Senate resolutions against giving aid. So there's actually some teeth to the restricting of the Israeli actions in Gaza and elsewhere.
So other than trying to convince the people who are supposed to be our representatives to follow our own laws, you and I, we try to be part of the peace movement and look at nonviolent ways to make an impact. Let's talk more about, BD&S, boycotts, divestment, and sanctions, some of which are personal actions and some are governmental.
Yes. So BDS started in the early 2000s, and it's modeled obviously after the BDS against the apartheid state of South Africa, which was successful. And so I think it's a longer-term project on the issue of Palestine because the entrenched pro-Israel, political, both economic and political forces in the Western world, but we'll focus on the United States, particularly after 1967, and that there was a national security linkage between the two countries. But that is fraying now, and so on a personal level, there are apps out there that I think it's like No Thanks, I think, and there's Boy Cat, like with a cat, there's the kitties. So there are different. You can search in Apple Store and other places for apps where you can actually just take your phone and scan the barcode on it and see if it's on the boycott list. And of course, they're the ones that take the time and effort to analyze whether something is under a BDS or not. And because that takes some thought and care, because you could throw your hands up and say, oh, everything has some connection to Israel, so we can't do anything. But they actually determine what high value target versus lower and things like that. And so they take the care to understand what is worth boycotting or not.
And we see boycotts on smaller scales on other issues working. Recently, Avelo Air airline stopped running the deportation flights for ICE because they won't admit that it affected their bottom line, but I'm sure it did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a few years ago, I remember in Connecticut, Eversource got a big rate increase. Mm-hmm. And I think about 10 to 20% of their customers moved to a different electric supplier.
Oh, yeah.
I did as well. The next time they could come up for an increase, they didn't increase. They said, oh, this has nothing to do with our losing customers.
Yeah.
But when you look at how corporations are structured, and they are responsible to their shareholders to create returns, anything that loses money for them is something that they're going to stop. Of course, they adapted, and they now have low per kilowatt rates, and they've raised the delivery rates. So I don't know. It's a moving target.
Yeah, but your point being that boycotts, they actually work, and that is true, and it's not as dramatic, and you're not going to see the end of Israel tomorrow because you didn't buy a McDonald's hamburger, but they do, especially over time, and in small ways, they do have an impact and are effective. But more effective is on the governmental level. And so actually there is a really impressive guy. His name is Shir Hever, and he's a former Israeli who now lives in Germany, and he is kind of like the BDS's brain trust. And so he analyzed the way the United States work. He said that for legal reasons, the federal government of the United States cannot directly invest in Israeli stocks and bonds. But the way the Israel lobby gets around that is that they ask all 50 states to invest, especially their pension funds, in the state of Israel. And so that's why divestment on the state level is so important. And it's also why, especially southern states, invest so much heavily in the state of Israel, like Mississippi. And so there are articles on the state level investment in the state of Israel, and in particular it highlighted Mississippi. And so that's why the Connecticut Palestine Alliance is working very, very hard on both city level and state level divestment campaigns. And because the state of Connecticut had 2 ceasefire resolutions, 2 out of 169 towns, but they're nice and good, and we encourage them in Bridgeport and Windsor, but they're just political. But if you can actually do divestments, you can actually take money out of the war machine, and that has I think a more effective and profound impact. And it's especially because it's modeled after the effective anti-apartheid divestment campaign. And so, should I mention that we're having a meeting today?
Oh, yes, we could. Although by the time this airs, we'll have.
But there'll be other meetings after this. Yes. And so this meeting we're having in a few hours is going to have 2 halves. One is on the New London city-based divestment, and that's modeled off successful divestments in other cities across the United States. The most closest to us is Portland, Maine, or Belfast, Maine. And there's also the biggest governmental entity that did a divestment campaign was Alameda County, on the county level in California. They in particular had some investments in Caterpillar, which has a lot of investment in Israel. So they withdrew their money out of the Caterpillar Corporation that had a lot of investments in Israel. And so, and so I was able to get the actual text and list. So it seems that the other half, I should say, is the state-based, Connecticut state-based divestment, and we should give a shout out to Stan Eller out of the Middle East Crisis Committee, because he's been on this even before I came on the scene, or the Connecticut Palestine came on the scene, and so we're kind of running with his efforts to pressure Eric Russell. He's the current state treasurer, and so just some good news is that Eric Russell claims, and we'll double check it, he claims that Israeli bonds, which are performing poorly financially, he had let the investment, the state of Connecticut's investments lapse. And so that means that he did not actively reinvest the money in the Israeli bonds. So technically, and we'll see if he's true, he has divested from all Israeli bonds.
Because they're not a good investment.
Yes.
But it doesn't really matter why.
Yeah.
And I can probably attest to the fact they're not a good investment. Back in the 60s, I think, my parents bought a couple of Israeli bonds, and I have some. There's one, and I got rid of them all, sold them all, except one. Every year I get a 1099 that
Still?
I have like $500 in an Israeli bond, and it's from ComputerShare or something, and I phone them almost every year and say, can I cash this in? And they said, we have nothing on record. So it was a terrible investment because apparently this bond was purchased and the original purchase price can't even be salvaged from it. So I don't know. It's just one of those irritations.
ComputerShare, they're the ones that they do the organization. They're not in the actual company.
Right. So it didn't sound like it was part of their direct thing, but that's who the 1099 came from. So I called them, and I don't know who to call to ask to get this this money back.
Yes. So going on the state, So I'm encouraged that the New London people have come together, and which is relevant to this show, of course. So we're working hard. So New London is nice, and this is information that I got from you. New London is nice in that ordinances are easier to propose from citizens than resolutions, and ordinances will be more powerful and effective in this case. And so it seems that what we need to do is just copy the model of the Portland, Maine people and provide the list. So that's the key to these divestment programs, is the list. So we were able to get a list of about 248 companies that the state of Connecticut invests in, and I have the list from Portland, Maine. And so that's the trick, is that, well, first maybe we should find the investments currently from the city of New London to see, and then pick out the ones that match those lists or are Israeli investments in general, and have clauses, and this we'll have to debate what text can or cannot get passed, and that's where we hope to use the good graces of Jeff Hart and his knowledge, have some text that makes it more flexible in that the language prohibits any future investment that has investments or operations or licenses in the state of Israel, because that kind of language is in the Connecticut state statutes that a person from the Northeast Connecticut Gaza Group was able to get. So the Connecticut state statutes specifically mention divestment from Iran, Sudan, and in a weird way, Northern Ireland, if it doesn't apply to certain principles. So there's some little quirky thing about Northern Ireland, but it's explicitly in the statutes against Iran and Sudan, and the language of that statute, encompasses all kinds of operations and situations of investment in those countries, which we will just lift and apply to Israel and maybe incorporate in the New London City Ordinance. And of course, that's our long-term goal, is to do also some legislation in the Connecticut General Assembly. But obviously, we're not expecting to happen this session.
No, in fact, it'll take a while. But I do wonder if now, we talked a little bit about how the operations of ICE have are related and have had their own impact. You know, one of our recent rally, I don't remember what groups came together for it after the murders in Minneapolis, but our mayor spoke at one of them. And I'm wondering if maybe we can even do a broader kind of divestment in weaponry that's being used against us too. And there is overlap, of course, because we are using systems.
Weaponry and technology, because Palantir, you know, maybe there should be a divestment from these spy technologies that ICE is using. Palantir is the biggest one, you know, and you know, Palantir is a spawn of the CIA's InQtel. After 9/11, they kind of started funding these nefarious spyware companies, and so absolutely, I think yes, we should definitely connect the two issues, and because they are intimately connected to the BIRD program and these technologies.
They are, and I think the ICE issues hit closer to home than Palestine does for most people. You and I both have a personal connection that many people don't have here. And you know, maybe I'm sure our city local economy, we're not going to shift it away from the military industry no time soon. But maybe we can make a start with our investments. Well, we have about 4 minutes left, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how people can get in touch with Connecticut Palestine Alliance and keep informed on an ongoing basis. So
we have two main means of communicating. One is our email list, it's regular old-fashioned email listserv, and it's to get on that. It's a website that's bit.ly, bit.ly/Palestine Alliance, and then Instagram. It's just @PalestineCT. And so we're happy to have the website PalestineCT.com, and you maybe go to the other. Yes, there you go. So you can see the @PalestineCT Instagram handle at the bottom, and then the email listserv is that URL, the bit.ly/Palestine Alliance. And so we post. It's not a pretty heavy post, like 3 times a week. And Instagram is more populated over the week. But I should note that on February 7th at 11:15 a.m. in downtown Hartford at the People's Bank Arena, there is a women's basketball game. And so with the Veterans for Peace, which we really love that organization, Veterans for Peace Connecticut, led by Jim Brasile, we went together and did some rallies and at the UConn football games at the RTX, or the Raytheon Stadium in East Hartford. So we're continuing that theme and doing it with a basketball game, and it's a women's basketball game, and this is in downtown Hartford, the People's Bank Arena, and that's Saturday, the February 7th at 11:15 a.m. The game starts at 12, but we basically catch the foot traffic to the right front. There's a nice area before the security guard, security screening, where you can just hand out flyers and we'll raise awareness about Palestine and get them connected. And this rally is specifically designed, and we'll have literature to this effect, designed to link and to not to link, but to show the link between Palestine and ICE through this BIRD program and the training and technology between ICE and the State of Israel.
I think we have started to learn at least that abusing any people can lead to abusing pretty much every person.
And it's well known that empire, and all the technology and brutality that we kind of ignore for decades now, especially after 9/11 in Iraq and Afghanistan, that those abuses and practices, get shipped home. And because, it's because all those people are trained and they learn the technology and they apply it to their subject populations. But the politicians here in the United States, they want to apply the same, Trump in particular, he wants to apply the same against the Somali population in Minneapolis, and then anyone who supports them, which means the general population of Minneapolis is very blue. And so they will all become, subjects to the police state. And so that's why all these, the intersectionality is becoming so clear now.
Thank you, Omar. We'll have to have you back again as things unfold.
Yes.
And for people watching this, next week will be maybe more upbeat. Brad Sheridan and maybe a couple other people from Fiddlehead's Food Co-op will talk about its upcoming 18th birthday and where it's come from in less than 2 decades.
Yes.
So we'll see you then, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
When the rain don't